Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew Clark, and in today's video, we are going to be taking a look at my brand new pedal board. So I've been wanting to make some changes to my pedal board for a little while now. You might even be familiar with the other two videos I did on my channel last year about putting together a pedal board. And something that's very important to me is keeping my pedal board very small and compact. I'm not a fan of these big, huge pedal boards. I love looking at them, but for me, it's more about finding the tools that I find most essential instead of having a bunch of extra clutter and just building everything around those things that I use all the time. So the actual board that we're gonna be putting the pedals on is the brand new pedal board rail from Mono, and they actually sent this pedal board to me for this video specifically. And the pedal board rail comes in 3 different sizes. They do a small, a medium, and a large. Because I really like the small, compact pedal boards, I went with the small size. It's essentially the same size as the Pedal Train Classic Junior that I've been using for the last 10 years, but the design itself is a little bit more sleek and a little bit more updated. Now, no matter which size of the pedal board you actually order, it comes with this case. Obviously, there are different sizes for the different sizes of pedal boards, but this thing is awesome. It's in typical Mono quality. I'll open it up here for you. Inside, it's pretty simple. There's a pouch here, a Velcro pouch if you want to store some extra cables, but otherwise it's kind of just designed to fit the pedal board. And then basically the way that the design on the bottom here works, it's wider, so it actually stands like this and it doesn't topple over because, let's see if I can change the angle. It's a little bit wider on the bottom like that with the feet. They also have sent me over one of their new power supplies for the pedal board as well. So I actually got the largest size of their power supply. And the cool thing about this is it is extremely lightweight and extremely low profile for the amount of power that it delivers. So I've been using the TrueTone CS12 to power my entire pedal board for the last year or so, and it's been great. I have no complaints. But that thing weighs more than 3 times as much as this thing. On top of that, it only has a handful of 500 milliamp outputs, whereas the one from Mono here, every single output, so all 10 outputs on this power supply actually can supply 500 milliamps. And then 3 of those outputs are switchable between 9 volts, 12 volts, and 18 volts. It's also got a handy little USB output as well, which is kind of cool because you can charge your phone at a gig or your iPad or whatever else. So one of the biggest reasons I wanted to make some changes to my pedal board is because with the old setup, I actually wasn't able to mount any other pedals underneath the board. But with the Mono pedal board and this very low profile power supply, there's actually so much room to mount stuff underneath. So what this allowed me to do is mount my Origin Kali 76 compressor underneath, which I leave on all the time anyway, so I don't need it on top of the pedal board. Mounted underneath, as long as it's turned on, I never change the settings. And then also, something that I used to do in the past, but haven't done in a while, is I used to love to have the Rockett Archer on all the time, just before all of my drive pedals, kind of boosting everything. And I just like the way that even with the gain all the way down and it just barely boosting the signal, I like what it did EQ wise. It did something very cool to the low end and to the mid range that I like. And now that I've got these mounted underneath the pedal board, it totally frees me up to just put pedals on the pedal board that I'm actually turning on and off and using. With that said, the rest of the gear that we're gonna be using today, I'm gonna be playing my Suhr Classic S Antique, which is the guitar that I use most of the time, especially here on the channel. And then I'm gonna be running from the pedal board into my brand new Suhr Bella. This is the amp from here on out you're probably gonna be hearing most of the time on the channel. I will be doing a dedicated video on it very, very soon. So if you're interested, be looking forward to that. And then from there, we're just going into the Suhr Reactive Load IR, where I'm using York Audio impulse responses. So without further ado, we're gonna switch cameras and we're gonna take a closer look at the new pedal board. Okay, so we'll start things off with my Kingtone. Now this has the Kali 76 compressor and the Rockett Archer on underneath the board. And then we also have the Golden with a light spring reverb on as well. Everything else on the board here is bypassed. Okay, so first up in the chain here, we have the Sonic Research Turbo Tuner. This is my favorite tuner ever. They do make a smaller size as well. I've had this one for years and years. And the thing that I like so much about it is the display is very easy for me to read, especially in a live scenario. Some people don't like these with the rotating lights. They prefer the left to right. That's totally fine. It's mostly just comes down to preference when you're choosing a tuner, but this one here is my favorite. Now from here we go actually into the fuzz, and that's because I use a Germanium fuzz, mostly the Germanium setting on this fuzz. But I don't want to talk about that first. I want to talk about the pedals underneath, which are going to come after the fuzz. So we go into the Cali 76 from there. That's the next pedal. It's turned on. And if I were to turn it off, and back on. So it's not doing too much. I actually have it set quite subtly. Mostly what it's doing is it's changing the feel more than the actual sound that's coming through. So for me, especially with a Strat or a Tele and single coils in general, that compressor, it goes a really long way, makes everything feel much better. Now from there, we are going to be going into the Archer, and I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to show you what it sounds like when it's on. And with it turned off. Now this is mostly for the Strat. I just feel like it beefs everything up a little bit, especially in tandem with the compressor. With both of those there, it kind of makes the Strat just sound bigger and more full, but I'll still keep them on even if I'm playing with other guitars as well, because in general, it just does make everything sound better. For comparison, once more, I'll show you what it sounds like with both of them on, and then I'll turn both of them off so you can see what they're both doing together. Okay, so now we're back on the top side of the board, and we need to talk about the Kingtone MiniFuzz V2. And the really cool thing about this fuzz is that it just has a whole bunch of features. So kind of no matter what you are looking for as far as a fuzz is concerned, this is probably gonna do it. So you can see on the top here, we have the fat, zonk, and vintage settings. And those just change the overall characteristic of the fuzz. Personally, I'm mostly using the fat sound, especially again with the Strat sounds great. You can turn it into a zonk machine, which is really cool. And then the vintage sound, it's a little bit more of a focused sound. So if you're playing with humbuckers or something like that, I feel like the vintage setting is a little bit better, but I like the fat sound mostly. And then you can actually switch between Germanium and silicon. And this is huge because I love Germanium fuzz, but still sometimes, even with this fuzz, which is very good in the heat, I actually played a gig recently where I had this pedal and it was like 33 or 34 degrees. So very, very warm. And the Germanium fuzz just wasn't sounding great to me. Well, it's easy enough to just kick it over to the silicone setting and all of a sudden it works again. So this is what it sounds like. And these are the settings that I'm mostly going to be using. The only thing that I'm changing is, like I said, if it gets really hot, I'll swap it over to silicone so you can hear. Now it does have a bias control there, so you can under or over bias it depending on the sound you're going for. And there's actually a bunch of dip switches on the side that you can use as well. So with a Germanium fuzz, and especially a fuzz face style Germanium fuzz, it's actually gonna sound best going into an amp that is already dirty. So if you are using a clean amp, I'd recommend running it into an overdrive and stacking it up with one of those. So just to kind of show you what I mean, playing the fuzz without an overdrive into a clean amp, so the amp, And then if I kick on an overdrive, and that just helps deal with the fact that it is such a warm sounding fuzz. It's just gonna help push it through the mix a little bit more. To show you here what it would sound like with a dirtier amp, I'll turn up the volume on my actual amp as I'm playing here to kind of show you how it changes the characteristics. So. Even more. Down. So obviously you can hear it really shines with the dirtier amp. So best case scenario, you're running it into a dirty amp, but if you need to, you can run it into an overdrive as well. So next up, we are obviously going through the pedals that are underneath the pedal board. So we've got the compressor, we've got the Archer, we've talked about that. The Archer is a Klon clone. I don't remember if I've mentioned that yet. So it's doing something very similar to a Klon style pedal. And then from there, we actually go into another fuzz. And this is kind of a flex spot for me. So sometimes I'll put the Analog Man King of Tone in that spot. It just kind of depends what I'm going for. But what I like to do with the Benson Germanium fuzz here is it kind of works really well as like a lower gain fuzz and almost as like a rhythm guitar fuzz, if that makes sense. And especially if you're stacking it up with other stuff. So I have the gain kind of turned down a little bit and then I have the impedance up. And what that's essentially designed to do is work like a guitar volume knob. And instead of using your guitar volume knob, they've kind of disabled your ability to do that. Because they've put an internal pickup simulator inside there. So it allows buffer pedals to go before it, which is a big thing and why this fuzz is actually before the other pedals because this tuner is true bypass. Well, it allows it to interact with my volume knob still and doesn't mess with it too much. Where this one, it doesn't matter so much as a fuzz where you put it in your chain. I have it set up to sound like this. So it's essentially working as like a bright, fuzzy overdrive. There's not so much mid-range focus in there. So it really has a different sound from the overdrives that I'm using. But I think it sounds pretty cool. We'll move right along to the Browne Protein. This is like one of the most popular overdrive pedals. You see it everywhere, especially like on Instagram and stuff like that. It's great sounding. Sometimes I will swap it out for the Analog Man King of Tone. But lately I've really been digging this for the type of stuff I've been playing. So we'll start on the blue side. I'll jump onto the neck pickup here, clean. Really just a great sounding, very transparent overdrive on the blue side here. This is something that I'm pretty much gonna just have on all the time. Most of the time when I'm playing, especially at a gig, I'm just leaving this thing on. This is my rhythm guitar tone right there. If I want something a little bit different, I can go to the green side. And basically the protein here, the blue side is based on the Marshall Bluesbreaker. The green side is based on the Nobels ODR1. Two great sounding overdrives. Like I said, I'm mostly using the blue side. The green side kind of gives me a different, thicker, kind of woollier sound, which I think is really cool. And then quite often I'll either stack them together or I actually prefer to stack them with the Germanium fuzz when I want a higher gain sound. So that would sound like this. And then we can also stack both sides of the protein together here. Personally, I actually prefer the sound of them individually stacked with the Benson. That's a sound I'm going to use more often, but they do still sound good together as well. Now, out of there, we're going into the Universal Audio Dream, and I'm going to talk about this later because obviously, if I'm running into an amp, I'm not going to be using the Universal Audio Dream. But a lot of times with certain gigs and things like that, we're on in-ears and I can't bring an amp. And when that's the case, I use the Universal Audio Dream. So at the end here, once we've gone through the other pedals, because we are over halfway done already, we'll go back and we'll listen to some sounds with the Dream without using an amp at all. So let's turn off the overdrives here. And we'll move over to the Universal Audio Astra. Now I'm using kind of their trio of pedals here. I've been using them again for about a year. The Astra, the Starlight, and the Golden, they are outstanding pedals. The problem with them is they are a little bit limited. So if you want to have MIDI control, for example, or if you want to have a ton of extra presets and things like that, these are not going to be the right pedals for you. However, as far as tones go and sounds go, these things are basically the best of the best, at least in my experience. So let's start with the Astra here. And the main sound that I'm using is actually a preset here. And it is I think they call it the Dharma Trem. It's essentially just a harmonic tremolo, and I love the sound of this. So it sounds like this. So a very juicy sound. It sounds great with overdrive and fuzz as well. So if I kick on, let's do a totally fuzzed out sound here. So. Very, very cool sound. And then the other sound I have on here, this is kind of another flex sound. So right now I have it set to a chorus that sounds like this. So obviously just your standard chorus sound. I'll also use this for like a regular trem sound. And I also have a cool kind of vibrato sound that I'll use here. I can get over to that actually. I think it's already set. Okay, so next up we'll move on to the Starlight here, and for me this is doing more than just working as a delay. It's also working as a preamp. So obviously we're boosting at multiple stages throughout this pedal board. When nothing else is on, these are always doing some sort of boosting. And the built-in boost on the analog DMM and on the tape EP3 settings, this color knob here is working as a preamp boost. And inside the app, the UAFX mobile app, you can actually turn on to have it on all the time. Even if the pedal is disengaged, the preamp is still working. So even though the pedal itself is not on, there's no delay. If I were to turn up that color knob, it's a pretty awesome sounding boost. Now I leave it here, which it is doing some boosting, but obviously you're not hearing a ton. If I were to turn it down, just have it doing a little bit, and I just think the tone of it is very, very cool. For a essentially digital preamp entirely. I think it sounds pretty awesome. Now, I pretty much only use the Starlight for analog delay anyway. I'm not a big delay fan. Anytime I've ever tried a delay, I had a Strymon El Capistan for years and I just could never get along with it, and I just found myself never using it until I found out about analog delay, and I just love it. I think it sounds great, but I set it very subtly. So the main setting here, it sounds like this. So just a longer quarter note delay that I can tap along to. If I need a little bit of ambience, I'll kick this thing on. And then I have a preset on here as well. And it is just an analog slapback, so. And I play a decent amount of country music, so it just kind of allows me to have that. And then the last pedal that we have here is the Universal Audio Golden. And this is just an outstanding reverb pedal. Most of the time, 99% of the time, I'm just using it for the spring reverb, which I think sounds great. You might not have even really noticed it as I was playing before, but I'll show you how much it's actually doing. So. So I have all the settings very, very low. It's a very splashy, realistic sounding spring reverb, very hi-fi compared to the spring reverb tank in my amps. The Bella doesn't have it. The amp that I'm using now, it doesn't have reverb. The other ones that I have, the Fender Deluxe reissue and also the Easy G50 from Dr. Z, they have spring reverb. I actually prefer the sound of the Golden, so I'll usually just leave the reverb off on those and then use this instead. I just think it sounds really, really, really great. And then I do have a preset on here as well, and this is the plate setting. It's plate B, and this is just a beautiful kind of big plate if I need, again, more ambience. And then if you like stack it up with the longer delay and maybe an overdrive here, you get a pretty awesome sound. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the very last thing, which is the Universal Audio Dream. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unplug the pedal board from the amp, and I'm going to plug it instead directly into my audio interface. Okay, so now we've got no amp in the signal chain whatsoever. Out of the Golden here, we are going directly into my audio interface, and now we have the Dream turned on. And these are the settings typically that I'm going to be using when I'm playing live or recording or whatever. And this is our clean tone. We still have the boosts underneath the pedal board, so the compressor and the archer are still engaged. All in all, this pedal board is just perfectly designed for me to access all of the tones and sounds that I personally need and use on a day-to-day basis, but then also it gives me the flexibility to be able to, one, run through an amp or go through the Dream and bypass an amp altogether. And I can go mono, I can go stereo, I can swap things in and out. It's just perfect for my personal use cases. So I'd love to know from you what changes you would make personally to this pedal board. Everything that I use on this board, I'm gonna have linked in the description below. As I mentioned at the top of the video, Mono was kind enough to send over the pedal board, the case, and the power supply. So big thank you to them. I'll be sure to link all of their stuff at the top of the description. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and please also consider subscribing to the channel here on YouTube as well. I release a new guitar video just like this one every single week. With all that said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.